But yeah, I was just going to talk about some camera field of view tips, which is maybe not terribly exciting, but it had come up a couple times in some games that I was kind of working on over the last year. So I thought I'd kind of share some of those tips. This is like a little tiny example of sort of like a camera field of view from Star Wars Jedi Survivor. When he's running, it sort of accentuates it, and then as you kind of slow down, it also kind of changes the actual field of view. So it's maybe a little hard to see, and I'll share the slides, but that's sort of some of the gist of it, and I'll kind of show some more examples. Basically, every 3D application will have this field of view for you to edit your camera field of view. And you can kind of go, Unity will default to 60, and you can kind of go more or less with it. If you go high, then you're going to get something that's like a fishbowl look. It'll look like a 90s music video. If you go lower, you get stuff that's a bit more cinematic. Lower will also kind of flatten a look of things, whereas like if you go higher, it kind of stretches everything out. And because it's stretching everything out, that tends to be good for like first-person games. If you have something that's maybe like a top-down game or an isometric game, or you just have like not necessarily anything in your sky, then it can be good to sort of go with like a lower field of view. And I have some like examples of some of this. So this is like a Drexel game called Firmware Infirmary, where you're sort of playing in first person, and you're doing these sort of like mini games, and you're running kind of like a shop. And they had asked me to like for advice and stuff like that, and to fix some things. And so I ended up kind of messing with it. So this is sort of just like your default field of view, which I think was at like 60, which is like the Unity sort of default. This is what I ended up sort of changing it to a little bit. So I forget exactly how high I went with this, but I'm sure I went into like the sort of like high 70s as like a range for it. And here's like another example. Like one of the things, because there was like mini games in the game, the idea was you would go to these computers or the workbench, and maybe you'd be doing some like work there. And as I was like messing with it, you felt sort of far away from it. So like just by increasing the field of view, it will push stuff farther away, but it pulls some of the stuff like near you kind of closer. And it kind of warps, as you can kind of see, like this is your normal field of view again, this is like your high field of view. So it'll kind of start to warp some of the straight lines that you have in your scene, which can kind of just make it look a little bit cooler. Like because this was a relatively small space, and you're also sort of playing sort of this like shopkeeper, I was like, oh, it'd be cool if if it like felt more like you were like really in there, and you were sort of warping some of the lines and stuff, just to kind of increase some of the interest visually in the game. And then I kind of like pushed it a little bit with like post-process effects and chromatic aberration, and there's actually a little like blur here too, just to kind of like really kind of push the effect that you're like sort of in this space. So that was like again, like first person games are usually good for increasing the field of view, especially if it's like first person melee, because you don't have like the ability to see the distance between like you and someone you might be fighting or something like that. So by increasing the field of view, you can kind of gauge distances like a little bit better. This was another game called Horde. I think I saw Jordan in here. Jordan worked on this game. this was like the original field of view for it, which I think again was at like 60, like Unity's default of 60. You could kind of see maybe like a little bit of it because it's like a voxel game. Like the lines from these straight objects don't necessarily go kind of straight up. They kind of curve like a little bit with that field of view. This is like another I guess example of that sort of like curvature kind of happening. And then this was just like one of my suggestions of like lowering the field of view for that game, because you kind of have all the space in the air, because it's kind of like a top-down tower defense game. By lowering the field of view, you get stuff that's a lot flatter and sort of more cinematic, and you get sort of straighter lines, which, given that like the terrain was voxel based, I felt like kind of just gave it a much nicer look. Like you're not seeing as like, you don't necessarily need all those sort of like curved lines here, and that kind of like played the straighter lines, I felt like kind of played into the art style of the game as a whole, and just kind of improved it. And like, this is the thing, like I said, like most of these, when you look at them, people just don't touch those settings. But it just takes like 5. It's literally on a slider. It's just 5 seconds, and it does like really help a lot with the game and accentuate gameplay and game feel for like whatever you might be going for. In the game that I'm working on, I had it at 60 for like the longest time, and I kind of changed it recently. So there was always kind of like 3 different cameras you would have in the game. One was meant to be sort of like a over the shoulder first person, which is this. And then you have like a default, and then you have like a zoomed out. And I just kind of accentuated it a little bit. So like, this is just 65 inside of Unity. And it does sort of the thing that you might see in Jedi Survivor. It's just warping things a little bit. It's meant to maybe, if you're running, make you feel like you're running faster or something like that. This is another good example, like in comparison with this, but the character's not quite in the same position, so it's not like a totally accurate comparison, but you kind of see like some of the lines are just kind of tilted in it. And then just by sort of flattening it out just to like 55, you get a lot straighter lines, and you get more stuff showing up in the camera. What ultimately the effect is doing is it's kind of pulling you in. So you do have to sort of compensate and pull the camera out. But you end up seeing more stuff in the screen. And so you get sort of like these mid-ground objects, or you might get nice foreground objects, and your background objects are going to feel straighter and flatter and sort of more sort of cinematic overall. And in my zoomed out, I pushed it to like 45, and you can almost get like, it feels isometric in a way, along with like the tilt shift and stuff like that. And I think it just helps a lot, and it's just a quick little tip. And you could always, like in Jedi Survivor, you could always do it right in gameplay. So if you're hitting like a sprint button, if you want to accentuate that effect, you could write a little script that, or whenever you're hitting a button to like sprint, you could just make it that you're editing also the field of view of the camera. I find it maybe like a little jarring sometimes in certain games, or maybe in Jedi Survivor. So you could lurk between whatever your default field of view is and whatever you're changing it to, just to kind of smooth out that kind of transition. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And this is some of my stuff. I'll throw I guess the slides in the chat, if people want to check them out, or check out any of these games that are kind of mentioned here. Yeah, and that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. I want to say as someone who, you know, I'm a game designer, and I always think about these like little details, and any of my students who are in the chat will tell you I think about the little details a lot. And also as someone who's a big fan of film and thinks about shots and shot composition all the time, like this was super fascinating for me, because I'm also, again, like I don't do 3D stuff in Unity, so I don't know much about how that works. So seeing it in person was really cool. I'm going to echo some of the things Rob was saying to talking about the edits to Firmware Infirmary, which was also a team that I talked to a couple of times and looked at the game. And I really like that high FOV and how it kind of added this kind of like almost like voyeuristic kind of like, or like you're looking through a camera lens, like you're almost like cyborg yourself.
Yeah,
Um, that
yeah.
looks really good.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, it's all their work too, like I literally just they had an issue with like their shader. So I lit it and I changed the FOV
Mhm.
and did a couple post-process things and yeah, their work came out nice and um yeah, the other thing I was going to mention that you mentioned too, I guess like with 2D stuff, I guess all of this is kind of moot because you're kind of drawing usually every sprite or whatever. So yeah, in 2D this doesn't, I guess, apply as much.
I'm gonna have to mess with the FOV on the camera and see. This big, because secret to for people who don't know, even 2D games in Unity are 3D games.
Yeah, that's true.
See what
Yeah.
happens. Just see what happens. Maybe we get some cool effects. Does anyone have? Oh, I also want to echo to what Rob said, that your game looks pretty. I'm very interested in your game. I'm gonna definitely check out that link. Does anyone have any questions for Rob? Okay. Well, one more time, thank you again, and uh and look forward to again going through your slides and checking out the resources at the end and checking out some of the games. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no problem.
Rob Lloyd says, still for parallax multiplane looks, 2D can use cinematography tips. That absolutely is true. Definitely parallax is very helpful, unless you're going for like an older style that doesn't have parallax. But yeah.